Hi, Megan. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And welcome everyone joining today. So we've got nearly 100 people signed up today, joining from all around the world. Leaders from law firms, large multinational corporations, academia, media, leaders from ethics and compliance functions, and I'm sure some aspiring crime writers as well. Before we get started, let me quickly introduce myself. I'm Lauren Branston. I'm the Chief Exec of the Institute of Business Ethics, a global non-profit working to share knowledge and best practice in ethics and to create space for discussions like these around ethics in business and society. So before we get started, I just have a little bit of technical information. We've got an hour together today. The session is being recorded and will be uploaded onto our IBE YouTube channel. And we'll be managing the Q&A box. Thank you to my colleagues, Alex and Katie, for doing that. We'll be monitoring the questions as they come in. We might not get to all of the questions today, but please do put any questions you have in the Q&A box, and we will answer as many of them as we can as we go through our conversation today. Okay, let's get started. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Megan Davis today. Welcome. Megan is a lawyer turned crime writer, and you now work at Spotlight on Corruption. And your book, Bay of Thieves, which we are here to talk about today, has been a huge success. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Thanks for having
That's
me.
my pleasure. Thank you so much. So the book was the Sunday Times Thriller of the Month, and it was described by the New York Times, and I'm going to read out this quote because it's a brilliant quote, as a richly nuanced thriller that exposes money laundering, sanctions dodging, and human trafficking in a web of greed and corruption that ensnares everyone unlucky enough to come within grasp of the glamour. And I love that quote, and it does kind of capture how I feel about the book. And, I first came across Bay of Thieves. I've got a fantastic group of trustees and my chair, David Grayson, but one of the trustees, Louise Terry, got in contact with me just at the start of summer, and I hadn't quite started in role. But she said, you have to listen to Megan Davis on Woman's Hour. And for those joining from outside the UK, Woman's Hour is one of the BBC's absolute flagship radio programmes. And so I was able to, thanks to the joys of technology, listen to it on BBC iPlayer and very quickly get in contact with you, Megan, and ask you to come on the webinar today via LinkedIn, which was fantastic. I bought the book and read it on the beach and was just drawn in by the sort of the gripping tale, the glamour, but also how insightful it was. And, that kind of the human element, the way in which two of the main characters, Vanessa and Kate, get sucked into this web of corruption and crime. It was a joy to read, and really both a brilliant thriller and also so relevant to some of the challenges that we face in business ethics today. So thank you so much for coming. Maybe we can start. I'll stop telling you how fantastic I think your book is. Maybe we could start by just exploring what led you, Megan, to write the book.
Yes, thanks very much. It's lovely to hear all those very lovely words about it. I wrote the book because it's sort of based on an experience that I had, which was being a whistleblower in sort of financial services whilst working as a lawyer in London. And the thing that shocked me so much about that experience was, how easy it would have been to actually carry out the fraud that was proposed to me, and I was offered quite a lot of money to do that. I think before then I sort of had this idea, like a lot of people, even though I'd been working as a lawyer for many years, it was kind of a naive thought that, corruption is something complicated that happens, and, you have to sort of go out of your way to devise a fraud. But actually, it's very easy to do. It's very easy to falsify documents. It's very easy to, shift money through offshore funds, and it's very easy to lie. And that's what shocked me about it. And what the difficult thing is actually not to do that. So for me, writing this book was about sort of depicting this from kind of like a split personality. Like the Vanessa character is me if I had gone ahead with this deal, where Vanessa in the book is someone that's seasoned in corruption, and she's she knows what she's doing is wrong, but she's used to turning a blind eye. But her conscience is getting the better of her. She gambles and drinks too much. And whereas Kate, on the other hand, is the one that's determined to steer a sort of a fairly straight course through the firm. And she inevitably gets sort of like lured into corruption in various different ways. So I just really wanted to sort of go down that path, because I do think of it quite often, actually, how what would have happened to me if I had gone ahead. Because there's no coming back from that. There really isn't. Once you set off down that path, it seems to be, things just get worse, and that has always fascinated me. Yeah.
That came across so well in the book. I think the way that it was sort of, you took one step and then you were ensnared. I thought you did that brilliantly with so many of the different characters in the novel. It was fantastic. And I suppose, for you, your involvement in your own experiences at work and being drawn to write this book, has changed the course of your career and changed the course of your life to a certain extent. And I'm interested, would it have been easier to turn a blind eye?
It would have been, far easiest option. And, in fact, most whistleblowers, after this experience, I did go and work at a charity that does help whistleblowers called Protect, and worked there for a while. And what I think what all whistleblowers say is that they'd never do it again. Basically, they're glad that they were whistleblowers. I think they're glad that they weren't caught up in my case, in illegality. But the experience is so harrowing that no one in their right minds would do it again, or for that matter, advise anyone in the current climate to become a whistleblower, because the system is so stacked against whistleblowers and speaking out that there's a real disincentive to doing that. And I've often since then wondered why that is. And it just really intrigues me that that the situation is so bad for whistleblowers when they could be motivated as a really strong anti-corruption tool, but instead it just doesn't happen. So that's something that really stayed with me during the course of my experience as to how difficult this is to do.
Yeah. Well, congratulations again for writing the book and taking that step, to actually bring something so hugely positive and so valuable, out of your experience. At the Institute, we do this, study. It's just come out, Ethics at Work, a report into what discourages people. And it is really a sense of fear and a sense of futility, that nothing will happen as a result of speaking up, or that they will in some way face some form of retaliation for speaking up, and that is widely felt and does stop people from raising concerns. And I'd be interested, what becomes clear in the novel is that there's almost techniques that people can use, organizations use consciously or unconsciously, to suppress people from whistleblowing. What's your view on that?
Well, that's absolutely right. And in fact, I think it's sort of widely recognized that there's a playbook that unscrupulous employers will use their lawyers for dealing with whistleblowers. So what happens is you will have a whistleblower will raise a concern, doesn't go down very well with the organization, so they will then get on the phone to their lawyers and see how they can eject that person. And lawyers are very well versed in framing these sorts of things as maybe it's a company-wide sort of dismissal that's going on, or they can go through the employee's record and find a sort of a minor bit of misconduct and use that to get rid of them. So that once you have a whistleblower, I think the sort of knee-jerk reaction for a lot of employers is, and this is quite, understandable, is that, that perhaps they weren't aware of the wrongdoing that was going on. So it's a kind of a human response to become very defensive about something if you find some wrong, if you're alerted to it. But unfortunately, that can often sour into an attack, personal attack on the whistleblower themselves. And so, this happens time and time again. And, I think it's part of the problem that needs to be addressed in the legislation that applies to whistleblowers, because that knee-jerk issue needs to sort of be alleviated somehow. And one of the problems is that whistleblowing is seen as an employment sort of dispute often, whereas it's not necessarily. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. And your book has received, a lot of interest in the US as well as in the UK, and whistleblowers are treated differently in the US versus the UK. What do you think about the incentivization of whistleblowing and the way in which that is encouraged in the US? Do you think that is overall a positive, or do you think that's a negative? Do you think that's something that we should look at in other areas like the UK, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are, that's definitely something on the agenda that needs to be properly looked at. And, so one thing that struck me when I became a whistleblower was, this sort of real, almost like a psychological difference between the way that whistleblowers are seen here in the UK and the way that they're seen in the US. So when you think of whistleblowers, you think of, Erin Brockovich or something like that in the US. Sort of you think, immediately of sort of like a kind of like Hollywood whistleblower. Yet here in the UK, they're kind of seen as trouble causers and snitchers. And I think that part of that is to do with the way that the US incentivizes whistleblowers, and it has for many years now, where if anyone, not just an employee, has some information about wrongdoing, they can report it to various agencies in the US, and they stand to be rewarded for between 10 and 30% of the sanction that's imposed on the wrongdoer. And that's a huge disincentive, which gets over that sort of hurdle that a lot of people feel about the fear of kind of reporting. And another really important thing that this system in the US has, which doesn't apply here in the UK, is that kind of reporting is confidential and anonymous. It goes straight to trained investigators at the SEC or the Department of Justice that will look into it, and that doesn't apply in the UK as well. So I think there's a massive, there's a whole lot of things that can be taken from the US experience, and specialists in whistleblowing law say that financial incentives aren't necessarily available for everyone. So if you're a whistleblower in the NHS, for example, there's not that will not lead to a financial penalty being imposed on the trust, for example. So there's nothing to be rewarded there. So some people say that bringing in financial incentives, it's not a level playing field for all whistleblowers. So that hurdle needs to be dealt with. But definitely things like confidentiality, setting up an independent place where all whistleblowers can go to blow the whistle on anything, I think it is a step forward in the right direction. And those kinds of things I think we can really learn from in the US experience.
That is so interesting, so interesting. Thank you. Coming back to the novel, I'm very interested in the role of creativity in ethics. So the fact that, you need to really use your imagination to think about ethics in lots of ways, in a way that perhaps, I think about compliance as being about the rules and ethics as being more in the space of imagination. And I'm interested in that in terms of how you capture the public's imagination. And obviously we have seen recently, the post office scandal in the UK, which had been around for years and had been debated, discussed in the media coverage. It was not a secret in any way, shape or form, but it wasn't until it became creatively expressed in the way that it was on television, that it then transformed into something that the public could imagine and empathize with the victims in that situation. And here we are now looking and talking about the post office in the way that we are, um, what do you think about that, the role of creativity here? I mean, it's probably quite a cathartic process for you writing the book, but also in the response to the book, which has been so successful, what is it about kind of bringing it to life in that way that has mattered?
I think, that's a really interesting question. And the fact that the post office scandal was around for 20 years and it was only beginning of this year that it was that was catapulted into the public consciousness and became the biggest travesty of justice Britain's ever seen. So what was it about that scandal and bringing it to into an ITV drama that really captured everyone's attention? I think partly is, humans love narratives, and, one of the best ones is the sort of David and Goliath struggle where you've got, this massively resourced entity, and then on the other hand, you've got an individual, armed only with their conscience. And, the individual stands to lose everything. And I think it kind of feeds into this fear that we all have that, the struggle for justice is sort of doomed in a way. And we read about that in the paper every day. And we see these terrible stories where, victims upon victims. And, we just sort of switch off. We get battle fatigue. And the sort of news cycle at the moment is so grim and relentless that people don't engage because they don't want to be depressed again. Whereas if you present it kind of creatively, the viewer knows going into that drama that there's going to be a resolution, not necessarily, a happy one, but there is going to be some kind of resolution there at the end. And that's the contract that you have as a writer or a director is with your audience. You have to give them some way of tying the loose ends up. And so I think that for that reason, people are much more, happy to turn on Netflix and watch endless stories about lawyers behaving badly or bankers behaving badly or, or murderers, because they know that there's going to be a catharsis there in some way. And, and in fact, I think it's more interesting if it's not a kind of a clean cut sort of Agatha Christie, who done it in the end sort of thing. It's something much more nuanced because it leaves people with that that ability to kind of question it and think about it more for themselves. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. And that so resonates, and I feel like that ability to imagine or put yourself in someone else's shoes is transformed through creativity. You talk about Vanessa and Kate, these brilliant characterizations you've got there that you've brought to life so accurately. You can really go on the journey with them, and you can feel that kind of sense of peril increasing as the novel increases without giving anything away. I could see it turning into a film, quite frankly. Did you say that you had some news on that front?
Yeah, so I'm just about to sign an option for a TV deal on it. So yeah, hopefully it will ultimately be on the screen.
Amazing. Congratulations. That's absolutely fantastic. I can't wait to watch it on screen. So let me ask one question. I can see we've got lots of questions coming in, and I will turn to those shortly. But one question I have, creativity also enables you to potentially sidestep quite elegantly the risk of libel. Could you talk about the libel risk that you are potentially, that you are managing in relation to the book and in relation to whistleblowing for you?
Yeah, one of the things that has struck me about my whistleblowing experience was how keen my employers were to immediately shut me down, to stop any information about the wrongdoing getting out, and just this weaponization of the law that they used against me to, you know, intimidate, harass, wear me down with, you know, by having to engage lawyers myself, huge legal fees, was something you know, just it hit me like a train. I just, this is absolutely outrageous what they're doing. And you know, I can see that happening now with you know, the weaponization of the law, and using abusive legal tactics to, you know, stop other information about corruption coming into the public domain. So, you know, if journalists are writing stories about a corrupt individual these days, they can expect a flurry of legal letters to try and shut it down before it goes to print. And you know, there are many examples that we can give about journalists being sued personally and also as part of the organization or the publisher for putting out their investigations, even though they're properly researched and, you know, scrupulously researched. So, you know, that whole you know, phenomena, which is, you know, it's not new, but it's certainly kind of hit some kind of critical mass at the moment. And not only journalists, but also academics that are issuing reports, civil society that are, you know, commenting on the status of things. You know, it's sort of it's endemic, and a lot of it's to do with you know, the prevalence of the public domain and how much information is actually out there online. Companies increasingly do their due diligence, KYC checks, by checking open source information. And if there is, you know, some stuff, you know, articles written about certain individuals, then, you know, they may not continue to lend to them or whatever. So, you know, it's increasingly important for people to sort of launder their reputations by making sure that, you know, information doesn't reach the public domain. And so as a result, you'll have a lot of attacks on journalists who are trying to sort of get their reports out there. And so I think, you know, this whole area of sort of now me sort of fictionalizing, you know, a lot of the stuff that I've written does come from facts and stories about, you know, crypto scams and other things that I've seen, you know, sanctions busting and stuff like that, which, you know, if I were to write about them in a non-fiction way, you know, I'd have to get it legal. It'd cost me so much more money. It would, you know, it probably wouldn't, you know, reach an audience. But presenting it in a fictional way, you know, it's I can say what I like. So, you know, that is hugely appealing. And you know, a lot of the, you know, the crypto story is based on a very sort of like well-known story now, and in fact the sort of house where the story is set is based on a real one, but I obviously haven't used its real name. But you know, it's very important, was very important for me to sort of use real life stories in the book, partly because that's what inspires me, but also because I thought, you know, the book has to be sort of about something for me, you know, something that's really going on for it to be interesting. Yeah.
So interesting, so interesting. So in a way, so creativity gives you the freedom to explore topics without the risk of libel, but also, you know, we should all heed the fact that, you know, that libel laws are being used to potentially diminish the power of transparency and accountability, and that's something that we should think about without question. I'm going to turn to now to just a couple of questions. I've got more of my own, but I've got a couple of questions coming in, and one actually from Louise Terry, who instigated this whole webinar.
Thanks,
so
Louise.
Louise has asked, yeah, can you talk about what happens if there's no proof of wrongdoing? So the whistleblower is not vindicated. How can they have protection if perpetrators are allowed to continue? So there's no proof. So you know, so cases, I guess, that just come to nothing, you know. I suppose if they maintain their anonymity through that, I mean, I think that is critical and something, you know, that is very important to this whole process.
Well, I think that's a really good question, because you can imagine a scenario where, it might be an anticipatory whistleblowing, something might be about to happen. So perhaps by blowing the whistle, the event didn't happen. So, that again is really important. And I think, one of the whole issues for me in this whole process is who you actually have to blow the whistle to. So in my case, I had to blow the whistle to the people that were actually carrying out the fraud. So it doesn't work in that employment context. So if, as is being proposed, there is like an independent office of the whistleblower with trained investigators that concerned employees or other individuals can blow the whistle to, then the confidentiality and anonymity is assured there in that situation, and you can have statutory provisions to ensure that. So that, in that case, there is arguably no real risk on the whistleblower that they will be, harassed, victimized, bullied by their employer for blowing the whistle on something going on within the company. And that, happy situation might be that the wrongdoing is stopped, or if it goes ahead, then, the whistleblower, so the risk is taken out of that whole matrix, and so the whistleblower is protected there, because there's no, because at the moment the only protection really is this sort of you have the right not to suffer detriment by blowing the whistle, and your only recourse is if you do suffer detriment, then you have to sue your employer. And so the whole point of it should be that you don't suffer detriment in the first place. So therefore, ensuring confidentiality, taking the whole whistleblowing matrix out of employment law and into an independent, body or several of them that can deal with the complaints.
That feels critical, that whole idea of that it happens before as opposed to afterwards. This idea that you're going to go through the whole process and then judge where you land and then try to address any wrongdoing to yourself personally, but feels very onerous as a process. And one of the questions that's come in, which was, will US anti-SLAPP laws, now you might not be an expert on this area clearly, will US anti-SLAPP laws help protect whistleblowers?
So anti-SLAPP laws protecting whistleblowers, I think I'm not quite sure that they're aimed at the same thing. So it's more of, anti-SLAPP law is something that is designed to stop people shutting down sort of publication, or public participation. So that's,
slightly different,
demonstrating or publicizing some information, whereas a whistleblower is much more, it's much more targeted disclosure. So, I think I don't really see that it would necessarily cover whistleblowers. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. I suppose it's a different audience. It might indirectly support, but I think you're right. It's a slightly different topic. And then we've got lots of questions, which I think we've covered. Like, you say the system is stacked against whistleblowers. To what extent would you say the British legal system reflects that? I don't know if there's anything more you want to add to that.
Yeah, I think because it's an adversarial system. So yeah, as I said before, you have, as a whistleblower, the only right that you have under the Public Interest Disclosure Act is the right not to suffer detriment. And so you have to suffer detriment first before you get there. Then you have to, so you've been a whistleblower, you've disclosed some wrongdoing, and you've been sacked unfairly for that. So, you're at home and you haven't got a job, and you then have to take action against your employer and say, I was unfairly dismissed because I blew the whistle. Take that to the employment tribunal. And that's going to cost you about, on average, I think the median cost is about £40,000 to £50,000 that you have to pay yourself to get to the door of the court. to the tribunal. And then if you do end up getting there, then only about, I think it's either 3 or 4% of whistleblowing cases succeed at the employment tribunal. And so, you know, you have to be out of your mind to do that. With those kind of odds, you know, why would you do that? So, you know, the system is so badly stacked against whistleblowers that it's you know, I did that because I was so furious and outraged at what had happened to me, and I knew that you know, my bosses were actually counting on this imbalance of power to so that I wouldn't actually take this go further. So I did it, you know, in a way because you know, I was just so defiant against that. I just thought they can't rely on, just because the system's stacked against me, that I'm not going to take it on. So I did pursue them. And you know, it cost me a lot, actually. It was a harrowing experience, because the kind of intimidation that they brought to bear on me, sort of helped by their lawyers. Their lawyers would have been the ones that told them, you know, exactly what to do in this scenario. So, you know, it was outrageous. So yeah, I mean, the system is very badly stacked against whistleblowers, and I'm amazed actually that people still blow the whistle, because it's a frightening experience.
I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. And it sounds, you know, like a terrible experience to have to go through. And I can see why, as a result of that, you would now turn your energies and to resolving that, you know, and turning that around, both through the book and through your work. And I think that's so impressive. And as you're talking, I'm kind of thinking it's very interesting to me that you're speaking up and you're standing up for what you've experienced, and you've written the book, and now you're talking, you know, as a lawyer with your experience around whistleblowing. Are whistleblowers coming to you, or potential whistleblowers? Are you finding people approaching you for advice or counsel on what they're dealing with? Or, you know, are the Vanessas and Kates out there in the world kind of, you know, coming to you, or are you not finding that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I would probably expect to get a few emails after this webinar. And in fact, after the Woman's Hour one, I got quite a few people contacting me. I've written quite a few articles as well. One very surprising piece I wrote for the Big Issue. I got contacted by the lawyers of the Boeing whistleblowers who died. And you know, that was really quite sort of, you know, that was really touching, actually, to have been contacted by them, and they just thanked me for speaking out, you know, kind of on behalf of their clients in a way. And so, you know, it's yeah, I mean, I really love hearing from whistleblowers, you know, but there are designated helplines like the one run by Protect that deals with you know, that you can call for advice. And in fact, I volunteered there after my experience and learned a lot about whistleblowing and about, you know, and it was very cathartic, actually, because I realized that all whistleblowers go through exactly the same experience. You know, unfortunately, like the Boeing ones, it you know, some can die, you know, because of the experience that those guys went through, you know, they're dead. So, you know, it's terrible that it still goes on, even in the US, with all these protections. The fact that to then go and give evidence against Boeing. Yeah.
And could you just say, just whilst we're here, in case anyone's watching this after the event on YouTube, just a little bit about Protect and where to find Protect if people are watching this and wondering where they can go for advice?
Yeah, protect.org, I think it is. You can find it very easily online, and they do have a helpline, anonymous helpline, which is, you know, very, very good, with, you know, some fabulous people there that, you know, if anyone has a concern, they can call. And they also provide you know, whistleblower training to organizations as well. So, you know, they're a great resource for whistleblowers. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you.
Yeah, because I think you know, the landscape is just so complicated that, you know, even if you have gone over that threshold and say, yeah, I do want to blow the whistle, it's very hard to actually technically work out how to do that. What do you do? Where do you go? Yeah.
And we've got an interesting question coming in from Hugh Lee, who says, does research show that most whistleblowers at the start are hoping to improve their organisation rather than having a grudge against it? And this topic comes up in the Institute. We had a really interesting discussion with one of our networks with supporters on vexatious speak up, and it was almost at odds, because one of the insights was, if it's anonymous, then it might be more likely to be vexatious, but also at the same time, if it's anonymous, it might be more likely to be serious and end up in whistleblowing. So I mean, my feeling and answer to that would be that I believe most people are led by their values and actually with good intention. And, that tends to be true in the majority of cases. But I'm interested in your view on that, if you've got a take on that.
I think it's a really interesting question, because I think it probably, the whistleblower probably doesn't realize they're being a whistleblower until it's too late. What they think they're doing is trying to change things in the organization, make things run better, or change a particular procedure, and then all of a sudden they're catapulted into this labeling as being a whistleblower. So I think that does happen a lot. And yeah, I think it's very common for people to find themselves inadvertently being a whistleblower. And I think this is why it's really important to have independent trained investigators or advisors that are able to sift through the vexatious, someone's disgruntled at work and they decide to sort of rat on their employer type of whistleblowers, and the legitimate ones, because it's not going to be that difficult to do for someone that's well versed in this area.
Absolutely. And the other piece for me on that is how people understand the process, because I think sometimes you sort of make a complaint or you decide you're going to call a speak up line, but you don't really know what happens next. And to a certain extent, books like yours or other creative pieces of work help people to be able to imagine what might happen next if they do or don't act. What is at stake, which I think, and both the negative and the positive side of that on the whistleblowing side as well is obviously very, very important.
Yes, and at the moment there's a very fragmented whistleblower reporting regime. So it depends on what sector you're blowing the whistle in. It might be the NHS, it might be banking, or or law. Depending on where you are, you have a different person to blow the whistle to. And so big organizations which cover all these sort of sectors, it can be very confusing for the whistleblower to actually know who, they're already frightened about what they're doing, and it can be very difficult for them to know who to pick up the phone to. And in my situation, I was in the same situation, and I, even as a qualified lawyer, I didn't know who I should blow the whistle to. I ended up picking up the phone to the Law Society, who, as it turned out, was the wrong place to go to at the time. And I then had to engage my own lawyer at huge expense. So, the system just didn't work for me. And so many people, it's the same thing. And you're very frightened about giving the information to the wrong person, of course. And so, you never know whether that's going to be reported back to the people that are carrying out the wrongdoing, which it inevitably is, very invariably happens. So, I think that the whole system is in need of radical overhaul as to, exactly where the whistleblower needs to blow the whistle. Yeah.
Interesting. And one question that's come in, we're getting lots of questions, which is great. Brian Rogers, do you think the focus on the misuse of NDAs and SLAPs by the Solicitors Regulation Authority will have an impact on future cases?
Well, one of the problems with whistleblowing law is that whistleblowers kind of only get protection at the moment if they are not breaching, any kind of company confidentiality provisions, which they often are if they're blowing the whistle about something. So that's a sort of a misuse of an NDA system. So if you become an employee somewhere, you will probably be asked to sign a very comprehensive NDA about everything that you do. And I think so that's sort of designed to kind of catch a lot of things, but it also inadvertently catches someone that's whistleblowing. And then there is after the event, there's sort of two sorts of NDAs. That's the first one. And then there's the NDA that happens after perhaps you settle your case with your employer if you're blowing the whistle, and you will be required to sign an NDA there. And, so I think the NDAs are misused because, there's nothing in this is the crazy thing about our current whistleblowing law, is that there's nothing in the legislation or anywhere that requires anyone to actually act on the information that the whistleblower is given. So, I think there's some ever in the 24 years since Peter has come in, no evidence has been found of a single case having been passed, to a tribunal or the CPS for investigation. So this whole NDA secrecy system is actually stopping the crucial information, which is what the whole system's about, which is blowing the whistle against, misconduct. It's actually stifling that. So yeah, NDAs are abused, and they are stopping, like slaps, stopping key information about wrongdoing, corruption, fraud, getting into the public domain. Yeah.
And the other bit that I loved about the book, if I haven't told you already that I like your book, the in Bay of Thieves, is that you brilliantly brought in that idea of almost sort of double jeopardy, or a sort of sense of like, if I do this, this happens, or this, they're going to pull me in to do this, and then I'm actually bound into doing something else at the back end of that. You brought to life brilliantly the complexity, this web, and I think that's the bit that, NDAs sit within, which is, how do you have an environment that enables good ethical conduct, and one that is positive for people to do, and easier for people to do the right thing, as opposed to a situation where mechanisms like NDAs, but others, get you into this thing of you do something wrong and you yourself are implicated, and then you can't speak up either. And it's fascinating the way you bring that to life in the book. Was that connected to your personal experience? I mean, were you signing NDAs? Can you talk about this? And did you feel like there was sort of that sense of entrapment?
Yeah, very much so. There was, but also now you're talking about it, there was also there's a sense when you're going through this experience that you're kind of not yourself. It's a very sort of existential thing, and so you question everything that a lot of whistleblowers say this, particularly the ones getting back to Boeing, actually, because those guys had worked at that place for 30 years, so their whole livelihoods were, their identity was caught up in their work. And so when you blow the whistle against something like that, it's kind of an out-of-body experience. The sense of betrayal is huge, even though, you're trying to do the right thing by making a disclosure about safety concerns. So, it's very much a kind of, I don't think people are in their normal state of thinking. And so this sort of, increasing sort of sense of paranoia, like if I do this, what will happen? Then if I could go and do this, what will happen? That to me was very much the experience I had, which was, I know I'm not thinking, straight. I'm thinking kind of like a cornered animal, really. Is that the exit over there? No, it's not there. That could lead to another trap. That was definitely the feeling that I think, having read lots of whistleblower stories, they enter this sort of tunnel, or, go through the mirror, or however you want to describe it, of increasing unreality. Or maybe it's reality. You don't know. You think, God, is this the way the world really is? I mean, I think, so for example, just getting kind of off topic, the Panama Papers. So when that whole thing came out, it was like this whole, the people thought that the offshore banking system was a small part of the financial system, but actually those papers showed us that this actually was the system. And so it's those sort of like really seismic shifts that happen through kind of whistleblowing. And if you're in it, you do you do get this weird sense of, oh my God, I'm actually seeing the reality here. Take me back to, to Wonderland. I don't want to see this anymore. So that it was that absolute paranoia of what am I seeing here? This isn't what I thought it was. Is this reality? Is this, is it me? Am I going crazy? It's a very, very, discombobulating feeling. Yeah.
Yeah, and you capture that brilliantly in the book, and it does really come across, and that sense of being stuck in a system, that is very, very difficult to unpick and change. We really did come across brilliantly. We've had a very positive question come in from Laura Madden. And I think this taps in for me to something that the Institute of Business Ethics is very interested in, which is encouraging speak up and speak up cultures where you can constructively challenge and you can problem solve collectively, and open ethical cultures. And the question is, what practices or systems would you recommend for encouraging open communication and helping colleagues feel safe and supported when speaking up within a company, which feels very different from your experience of your job. But I wonder if you, through this process, have reflected on what's the flip side of this? How do you get to the positive side of speak up?
I think it would have been I guess the people that I could have blown the whistle to or sought advice from were all very financially incentivized by the deal that was going ahead. And so I think having someone in an organization that is not financially incentivized or bonused according to the company's profitability, that is the I don't know, grievance manager or something, would be that could be a first port of call for a lot of people that have concerns.
Creating a kind of safe harbor for issues when you're directly tied into. And our Ethics at Work report does show that a lot of pressure comes from meeting financial targets, pressures from your senior leadership team to, when you're being, pressured to compromise on your own set of standards or values, that is can often be connected. Not only, there are other things as well, work pressure, timelines, and so on and so forth. There's a whole system of potential pressure. But the financial incentive piece is definitely a part of that. And then I'm interested, but we've got, before we close, I was interested in, we talked, about female whistleblowing, and what the data that we see is that women are potentially more likely to speak up, but also potentially more likely to face retaliation or issues when speaking up, or not to be satisfied with the process of speaking up. This is not specifically whistleblowing, but raising concerns that could turn into formal whistleblowing. What's your view on the kind of gender aspects of whistleblowing?
Yeah, I was really intrigued by this because, and I kind of looked into it because of the spate of female whistleblowers in the tech sector. And I started reading around female whistleblowers, and, firstly, on one hand, female whistleblowers are sort of likely to suffer more sort of harassment and bullying. I think that's, and it's quite interesting, like digging into the sort of psychology of that, because I think if you're a woman raising concerns in the workplace, it's often seen as not necessarily what women are sort of expected, how they're expected to behave. A lot of women are expected to sort of like, sit down and be quiet, whereas whistleblowing is the opposite of that. It's standing up and speaking out. And also, there's a whole lot of gendered aspects to whistleblowing, which I thought was really intriguing. And then I just wondered, well, why are there so many female whistleblowers in the tech space? And I think partly that is possibly because women are kind of still sort of outsiders in tech. I think only 30% of tech workers are women. So perhaps they think that they've got less to lose, and I think only about 40% of managerial spots are occupied by women in tech. So they kind of have less to lose. Maybe they're the kind of, you know, mavericks or outliers in the first place that get themselves into those roles, so they see themselves as being, you know, agents for change in the first place. So I think that's a really, you know, interesting. You know, I'm not going to say that, you know, women are more ethical than men, because I think it's more nuanced than that. But
I'm glad.
but I think it's definitely something that's really fascinating.
Yeah, really, really fascinating. Well, you know, I'm looking forward to watching the TV show and seeing who takes the starring roles of Vanessa and Kate in the when it turns to the book goes to the screen. But we're running out of time now, so I'm going to close, and I'm going to say thank you to everyone who's supplied questions. I'm sorry if we didn't get to all of your questions. They've been brilliant. Thank you so much. The recording of this webinar will be available on the IBE website in a few days. And I just wanted to say thank you. I mean, you know, you're an absolute inspiration, and I think what you're doing, not just with the book, but more broadly in the sphere of whistleblowing, is absolutely inspiring. So, Megan, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for your time today. Really
Thanks
enjoyed
for
the
having me.
conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, take care. Thanks. Bye.